Hi, I'm Andrew Rodriguez, and welcome to PsychoBible, babbling about theology and psychology. And this is going to be one of my segments I call Reflessions, where I reflect upon a therapy session. I haven't done one of these in a while, and I've been sick, so I haven't done any videos in a while. But I had a session recently that brought up a topic that is really critical for counseling in general, but especially for Christian counseling. And that is the topic of sort of what is the goal of therapy, of counseling? Is it deliverance or sustenance? And this has a broader question of not just counseling, but when it comes to our spiritual life and the point of Christianity and spiritual growth, is it deliverance or is it sustenance? You see, this is a question that I've always had a very strong opinion about, or at least I get kind of impassioned when I talk about it. So going back to when I was in college and taking my psychology classes, the topic would often come up of how much change to expect in clients. And it really, no matter what the issue, whether we're talking about people dealing with depression, anxiety, addiction, and you sort of see people fall into two camps of, well, I think this person's going to have to deal with this issue for the rest of their life. Versus those of us who are like, well, no, isn't the point of counseling to help them overcome this issue so that it won't be, at least it won't be life-defining the rest of their lives, or it won't be something that's as major, but really, like, aren't there some things that we could potentially get past? What's the point of counseling if it's not to actually help heal people? If our only goal in counseling is to help people manage their symptoms, but not actually cure. Gosh, a cure is almost like this word that has all this baggage. Like it's a curse word in the counseling world. But isn't there such a thing as healing, emotional healing, psychological healing? And so this was an issue I really was passionate about, and I very much was on the camp of, well, what's the point in counseling if we're not offering some actual help, genuine help to people, if we're just helping them cope with their issue, to manage their symptoms, to get by. Well, what's the point? Aren't they doing that already and to some extent? Are we offering them anything of hope? Hope in some degree of change? Even if it's not a 100% radical, categorical change, is there nothing we're offering them as therapists or counselors, pastors, whatever, that their lives can actually be different? That their symptoms can be different, that their ailments can be different, that they can go away potentially, that they might be able to find healing. And it really bothers me as a Christian when we fall into, just by default, resigning to the idea that people will always have their struggle, that they will always have their mental illness, that they'll always have their disorder, that they will always have their addiction. And as a Christian, I was like, well, gosh, don't we believe that God can do anything? That what's the gospel? That we're not just forgiven, but we're born again, that we're made new. And shouldn't that have some sort of impact, not just on our status before God as sinners saved by grace, but also on our emotional well-being? So are we putting God in a box by not having some degree of faith that he can change things? You see this difference in theological perspectives, especially between charismatics or Pentecostals and non-charismatics and Pentecostals, especially the cessationists, the Reformed camp. They're going to be more on the side of emphasizing coping and managing symptoms. Whereas those of us from the more charismatic Pentecostal background are going to to be advocating this idea of radical transformation and deliverance from whatever issue you have. And that's because a lot of us have experienced radical changes. My father's one of them. When my dad was young, he was a drug dealer, a drug user. He was seriously depressed. He tried to take his life a couple times. Like, he was just not in a good state. And when he accepted Christ, he experienced what we call being zapped. And I can grow up saying that I have never seen my dad drunk. I've never seen him high. I've never seen him seriously depressed. I've seen him sad sometimes. But to the level of depression where he was suicidal, never seen that. And so my dad grew up with this radical experience of transformation as soon as he became a believer. And unfortunately, with a lot of charismatics and Pentecostals, it can leave them with this idea that that's how it's always supposed to be. That if you haven't been radically changed, then you haven't genuinely been converted, or you're holding something back, or that no, you got to keep praying for that radical change. You got to keep praying for this deliverance to come. And so it can be difficult for them to accept this idea that for some people, change is a process. So I was coming from the background as someone who knows that radical instant change is possible, but that for most people, change, especially for psychological issues, is going to be a process. Nevertheless, I still believed in change. So I would still get very bothered when I encountered other Christians who just think change is impossible, that people are always going to have their addiction, people are always going to have their depression, their anxiety, whatever the case is. And it's just, to me, that's not the gospel. So this issue really got triggered for me when I got this new client at one of my practices. The reason she's really coming in is she developed over the past year or so a phobia of a particular bug. In our area, we've been getting hit by this invasion of these lantern flies. They're not native to our area. They've come from China. So right now we're dealing with the coronavirus from China. But recently, before then, we were dealing with these lantern flies from China. So when they first came to my state, we didn't have any natural predators. So they were eating all of our crops, and it became a real menace. And actually, I think they're pretty cool. And they're at different stages. They got like the nymph stage, and they look weird. They got these long legs, and they look like these just weird little alien creatures, and they jump around. I think they look kind of cool. So I didn't know what to make of them when I first saw them. But then I was hearing the news reports that they're destroying crops, so it's your citizenly duty to kill them when you see them. So I sort of took pride in my ability to kill them when they would fly around, they land, they tire themselves out, and then you just kill them pretty easily. But I don't like to kill them because I think they look pretty cool. But I got this client who apparently has developed a phobia of them to the point where she won't walk across the street. She won't walk down the block. She works, she has a job, but she's terrified to go into the storage closet for fear of there being dead lantern flies in the closet, or even maybe live ones. But she'll do that stuff. But she has a lot of anxiety when she does it. So I was discussing with her our strategy for how we're going to deal with this phobia. And I explained the primary approach will be systematic desensitization. We first need to get her to a level of functioning so that she can just do daily tasks without being affected by this anxiety. So as I laid it out, let's start with some basics, like being able to stand outside your front door and walk around there with, like 5 foot perimeter for 5 minutes a day. Okay. And then, sort of measure your level of distress while doing that before and after. As you gain tolerance in doing that, then we can up the ante. We can broaden that perimeter to include the sidewalk and then going down the street. So gradually we'll develop desensitization to this bug. And as I was explaining this to her, she had a question, and she really struggled for a while to ask her question. But she started tearing up as she asked this question. And as she was sharing, it came out that she was struggling with understanding what the purpose of counseling is. She had never done counseling before. And she was trying to figure out, is this worth it? All this work, what's the point of doing counseling? So ultimately her question was, will I just be doing things, doing tasks, going to work, walking around my yard? Will I just be doing behaviors but still have the anxiety? Or will the anxiety ever go away? Will I always be dealing with this? And I couldn't give her just some trite answer. I took a moment and I really appreciated her question, because to me that's a question that probably most clients have but never voice. They don't know if it's worth asking that question. And some of them have just gone to the point where they're so used to their disorder, to their addiction, that they just assume right off the bat that this is going to be something I'll be dealing with the rest of my life. So why even ask this question? And so they've probably already been resigned to this fate of having this condition, having this fear, these impulses, these urges. But here she was asking the question, should I expect this to stay with me the rest of my life, or is there the possibility of it going away? At the core of this question is, what gives a mental disorder or mental illness its power? So the reality is, every client coming in for counseling has her own standards for living, and those standards become their convictions. They have their own, whether they're goals for their life, or simply, well, these are the things that I'm meant to do in life on a regular basis, a daily basis. It can be as simple as what we call the ADLs, your activities of daily living, like waking up, showering, basic hygiene, eating your meals, and then get a job, go to work, provide, pay your bills. Like, there's basic level of things that we're expected to do for life, and we own those. Like, I have a bit of a conviction about paying my bills and not becoming homeless. And not getting in debt anymore, and not going bankrupt, not becoming dependent on the government for aid, as long as I am able-bodied and capable of working. So that's a conviction I have. So clients, everyone has their own. We can sort of make assumptions about these convictions. Well, doesn't everyone have these? But some people, their standard for living could include homelessness. I am counseling at one of my practices a few clients who are dealing with homelessness. And for some, just being able to be in a shelter is enough. So what standards they have for themselves each day vary depending on their conditions that they're in. And so for them, the power of their disorder or their mental illness or their addiction has is on how much it impacts their ability to maintain their standards for living. So, in general, in counseling, our goal is to grow and strengthen their thoughts, their actions, toward these convictions despite their feelings, despite their emotions. All right, this is going to make more sense when I get to one of the next slides. And so usually it's the emotion that we're trying to change, the depression, the anxiety, the urge to act on an addiction, that pull, that craving. It's those things that we're most trying to change. And so as we continue to live out our convictions, our standards for living, despite those feelings, then the emotions lose their practical power over us. So even though there may be these depressing feelings and the anxious feelings, to some extent, as long as they are not dominating us, so that we're not living according to our standards, then they basically lose their power in a very practical sense. So the goal is to help people get to the point that even if their feelings do not change, we're still living life. We're still engaging life. And so I drew out for the client this diagram. You got your mind, you got your will, you got your emotions. These three are the components of the soul, the psyche. And that's what psychology is all about, the study of the soul. And that's what this is. You got your mind, will, and emotions. These three components that help us interface between our bodies and our spirits. So, at least from a Christian psychology perspective. And so your mind is where you have your thoughts, your beliefs, your plans for your day, your intentions, at least in the cognitive sense. You got your will, which is your actions, your behaviors. Your desires are rooted there as well, or manifested in your will. And you have your emotions, your feelings, your urges, cravings, your moods, all in that realm of emotions, okay? So as I explained to her, most clients are coming into counseling because they want to change how they feel. Their focus is on their emotions. Now there may be some things like, well, I have intrusive thoughts, or I have certain obsessive thoughts, and maybe I have an addiction, I have a behavior I just can't seem to get under control. But my assertion is that for the most part, it's the feelings that are associated with those things, or to a degree the feelings that are causing those things, that are the real reason why people are coming to counseling. That may not be the only reason why people are having problems in their lives, but what gets those addictions or those obsessive or intrusive thoughts to the point of being unbearable so that they want to come to counseling is because of the negative emotions that are implicated. Okay? However, the problem is, of those three components of the soul, the emotions are the one that we have no direct control over. So we can choose our thoughts, or even if we get intrusive thoughts or unwanted thoughts, but we can choose new thoughts. We can choose what we do with thoughts that enter our minds, even if they're ones we didn't ask for. We can choose behaviors, even if you're dealing with some sort of impulse problem, like Tourette's, or if you have an addiction issue, so you're totally undisciplined when it comes to certain compulsive behaviors. But you can still choose new behaviors. You can choose new actions. You can structure your life in such a way to reduce the impact of negative behaviors, and you can develop self-discipline. However, when it comes to emotion, you cannot simply choose an emotion. You can't make yourself feel something on command. Like, you can choose a thought. You can choose to think a particular thought. You can choose an action just by will. But when it comes to an emotion, like right now, I can tell you, hey, feel angry. And you can't make yourself feel genuine anger at will. I can't say, be enthusiastic. And you can just suddenly feel enthusiasm. No, because your emotions are subject to the other two components. They are determined by your thoughts and your actions. So the typical cognitive behavioral way of approaching negative emotions is to circumvent the emotions themselves by focusing on the thoughts and actions. So if we start with our thoughts, if I'm going to choose new thoughts or choose plans to do things that are going to be healthy for me, and choose healthy self-talk, self-talk that is both realistic, it's rational, as well as positive and helpful. So healthy and helpful. Then we choose actions that are based on those things, based on healthy thoughts that will reinforce those thoughts, that are realistic and goal-directed and going to be healthy for us and healthy for others. And as we do those things, then that will hopefully impact our emotions. And as the emotions change, they will impact the mind. This works the other way as well. That even if we have negative emotions, even if I'm depressed, I can choose to get out of bed. My emotions, my depression is telling me stay in bed. Avoid life. Avoid responsibility. But I can choose to act opposite. It may be difficult. It takes a lot of discipline. But I can choose actions that will act the opposite of what my emotions want me to do. So in the case of the client with the phobia is telling her, don't go down the street. Don't live life. Stay inside the house. Isolate yourself. Do everything you can to avoid these bugs. So if if she starts with emotions and listens to the emotion, then that's what will happen. She will avoid the bugs. It will reinforce the fear by reinforcing the ideas that these bugs are dangerous, and then that will just cycle back to the emotions and increase the fear. But we actually have enough of a free will that despite emotions that may tell us that it's dangerous and it's unsafe to engage life, we can choose actions that are healthy. So she can choose to step outside and go where those bugs might potentially be. So that's an act of the will. And as she does that, that may change her thought from being, oh, this is dangerous, I'm in danger, these bugs are going to hurt me in some way. As she then goes and engages the outside world, she's also gaining a new experience and seeing that, oh, it actually is safe. So that now enters the mind. And as she thinks she's safe, that could potentially help ease that anxiety. And so it goes both ways. The mind affects the emotions, which affect the behavior then, as well as the mind affects our decisions, and our behavior can affect our emotions. So this is what I explained to the client. It's kind of both. The answer to your question, like, will I just be doing actions and still have anxiety, or will the anxiety go away? And what I had to explain to her is it's actually both. There are certain things, there's things you want to do in your life. There are standards that you have. You don't want to be stuck inside your house all day, do you? You want to be able to go to your job, earn money. Your mom needs you to help out around the house and to help by going to your job and earning money and helping out with the bills a little bit. So you have some obligations. You have things that become your convictions about the way you're going to live your life. And so if you let this anxiety control you, you won't be able to do those things. So we want to develop resilience and fortitude to face these things and live according to our convictions no matter what. No matter if those emotions change. We don't want the emotion to dominate our thoughts and our actions. But as we choose healthy and rational thoughts and actions that are goal-directed, that are toward meeting our convictions, then that the emotion loses its power. And as it loses its power, we have the possibility of that anxiety eventually going away, that irrational anxiety. We don't want to be totally anxiety-free. We need anxiety for certain things in life. But the irrational, the phobia, the fear of something irrational happening, that may potentially go away as we continue to live according to healthy and rational thoughts and behaviors. So there's a period of pushing through the anxiety and then a period of that anxiety decreasing. To what extent, we do not know. We cannot predict. But it's kind of both. It's kind of, yes, we're going to live life and still have the anxiety, and with the hope that it will go away. If we wait for it to go away first, though, we won't do anything. We won't live life. So we have to be willing to push through that anxiety, to act opposite of it. Otherwise, we won't be doing anything. So essentially, as a Christian client, I also explain it this way. That when we're going through a difficulty, or we're struggling with a sin issue, and we pray to God to help us with this issue, there are two ways that He could answer that prayer. There's two ways that He could help us. The one way is that He could sustain us, that He could give us the strength we need, the grace we need to make it through the difficulty. The other way is that He could deliver us, that He can take the difficulty away from us, that He can remove the obstacle so that we don't need to endure it anymore. And so as I was going through this, I've just numerous scriptures come to mind, and just recently I'm going through the Psalms, and I just started to go through the Psalms, and Psalm 3 jumped out at me because it's exactly about this, about our prayers to God to both sustain us and deliver us. This is a Psalm of David when he's fleeing from his son Absalom. So he's being persecuted right now. He's facing a major trial. And he says, "O Lord, how many are my foes? How many rise up against me? Many are saying of me, God will not deliver him. But you are my shield around me, O Lord. You bestow glory on me and lift up my head. To the Lord I cry out, and He answers me from His holy hill. I lie down and sleep. I wake again because the Lord sustains me." So He keeps him going, keeps giving the energy, the strength he needs. But He hasn't got rid of the problem. The enemies are still around. But He says, continues verse 6, "I will not fear the tens of thousands drawn up against me on every side. Arise, O Lord, deliver me, O my God. Strike all my enemies on the jaw, break the teeth of the wicked. From the Lord comes deliverance. May your blessing be up on your people." So he's praying for that deliverance. He's praying to be rescued. But in the meantime, God is sustaining him. And then in the famous passage in 2 Corinthians 12, 7-10, Paul speaks about his thorn in his flesh. We don't know what it is. We just know it's an ailment of some sort that he keeps asking God to take away from him. But it says here, "To keep me from becoming conceited because of these surpassingly great revelations, there was given me a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan, to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me." That's praying for deliverance. "But He said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." And there's both the sustenance. My grace is sufficient for you. There's the sustenance For my power is made perfect in weakness. And it's within there's hidden both sustenance and deliverance. So it's as he is being sustained and as he is enduring, God will bring that deliverance. And this is echoed as well in Romans 5, starting at verse 1. One of my favorite passages. There's so many in Romans, but this is one of my favorites. Therefore, since we have been justified through faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have gained access by faith into this grace in which we now stand. And we rejoice in the hope of the glory of God. There's our deliverance coming. We rejoice in the hope of that, of the glory of God being delivered from this life, from this sin. Not only so, but we also rejoice in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance, character, and character, hope. And hope does not disappoint us, because God has poured out his love into our hearts by the Holy Spirit whom he has given us. So there's a sustenance, that's perseverance that we need to get through our sufferings. But it's through the sufferings that God develops character, and that character brings hope. As we look back and we see the change that has already occurred, it gives us hope that he's going to continue this change. And then there's the end of the book of James in chapter 5. Is any one of you in trouble? He should pray. Is anyone happy? Let him sing songs of praise. Is any one of you sick? He should call the elders of the church to pray over him and anoint him with oil in the name of the Lord. And the prayer offered in faith will make the sick person well. The Lord will raise him up. So there's deliverance. But at the same time, this is James. And we all know in the beginning of James, it says, consider it pure joy when you go through persecutions and you have to persevere through all sorts of trials. So there's the sustenance and deliverance. We see them both as the ways that God answers our prayers. So when it comes to Christian counseling, my foundational questions are, can God do anything? Is he limited in what he can do? And not just can he do anything, but does he tell us he'll do certain things? Does he tell us that he will transform us? Does he promise transformation? And that, I would say, is a resounding yes. The key verse in my counseling practice, Philippians 1:6, that he who began a good work in you will see it through to completion. But we also have to ask ourselves, does he promise trials and suffering? And the answer to that is a resounding yes as well. Not just because that's how life is. Life is suffering. Life is difficult, but especially as a Christian, Jesus told us, hey, they hated me, they're going to hate you. So buckle up. But it's more than this is just a fact of life, but there's a purpose in the suffering. There's a purpose in the trials we have to experience. And we see that it's the pathway to transformation. The pathway to resurrection is first the cross. So as we persevere and we go through difficulty, as we rely on God to sustain us through difficulty, there's our hope that he will ultimately bring deliverance. So I hope this makes sense to you. And if you can get this concept, then you can understand what the purpose of counseling in general is. That is to help the person develop resilience to their issue itself, resilience to the shame around their issue, resilience to just the difficulties of life, the everyday trials and the load of everyone's daily responsibilities. But it's also to map out a pathway toward transformation, toward characterological growth, toward healing of the wounds that have brought about a lot of our pain and suffering, and potential to prevent further wounding. So we want to develop strength as well as healing. For example, if you're dealing with depression, because of your convictions about the way you live your life, you could make your goals that, all right, no matter if my depression changes or not, It's not going to have power over me. I'm not going to let it decide for me if I'm going to get up in the morning, if I'm going to go to work, if I'm going to engage in my relationships, and I'm going to refuse to fall into self-pitying and isolation and self-harm and suicide. So there are things that I'm going to refuse to do because that's what my depression wants me to do, and there are things I'm going to choose to do, and ways I'm going to think and beliefs I'm going to nurture in my mind, because those are the things that my depression doesn't want me to do. So that's pretty much what counseling is about in general. So if you got that concept down, then you should be able to understand this other example, which for some reason is controversial. And that is a case of a client with unwanted same-sex attraction. So how do we approach this? Once again, what are the person's convictions? Their own sincerely held, voluntary convictions about the way they should live their life. It could be because of their religious convictions. It could be because they just have a desire to follow their biological design and not engage in sexual behavior that violates their biological design as a male, as a female, and to only fulfill sexual desires that are in accordance with natural law. That could be their conviction. It could be a conviction that it's a sin for them to act out in homosexuality. It could be a conviction that sexual expression is only for marriage between a man and a woman. Whatever their conviction is, that is the client's own conviction. The counselor's job is to aid them in living according to those convictions despite any feelings to the contrary. That's the same whether we're dealing with someone with an addiction issue, whether we're dealing with someone with a depression or anxiety. So it's the same if you're dealing with someone who is coming voluntarily for unwanted same-sex attraction. What are their convictions? So is the goal change or management? What I've been saying before. It's endure the trial. Live according to the convictions, no matter if the emotions change, no matter if the same-sex desires, sexual desires, eroticization, their same-sex arousal changes. But as we're doing that, we're hoping for some degree of change. Will it ever change? We do not know. But we do know that if we're reinforcing the convictions, then whether or not the feelings change, whether or not the attractions change, the arousal changes, that person is going to choose to live according to their convictions, and we're going to help aid them and supporting them in developing resilience against the attractions that are against their convictions. This is the same whether we're doing any sort of counseling. So, you might not have saw this particular part coming, but if you watch my channel enough, you know that I deal with clients with all sorts of sexual issues, and one of them may be clients with unwanted same-sex attraction. And so if you're wondering, well, what's that counseling about? What's it like? Are you trying to force change upon them? Are we trying to, are we making promises of cures? This should clear that up for you. And no, there's no promise of cure. There's no promise of categorical radical change. But we are aiding people in their convictions with the hope that as they do that, and they work through some of the wounds, that there will be a degree of healing. And that healing will help aid them in their convictions, in living according to them. So I hope that helped understand in general, when it comes to counseling, are we looking for deliverance or sustenance? And the reality is what? Both. And the pathway to deliverance is enduring a period at who knows how long of sustenance through radical self-examination, radical surrender, of denial of the urges that come from these negative emotions that want to keep us from living life to the fullest. So if you got any thoughts, please comment, and if you agree, please share. If you like this sort of content, please subscribe and let me know. Hit that bell for notifications whenever I create something new. I try to put out at least 3 videos a month. Like I said, I was sick recently, so I'm a little behind. But thanks so much for watching. God bless.